Good morning, everybody. My name is Theresia Hernandez. I am your second presenter today. Before I begin, I would like to check my sound. If you can use your react buttons on the bottom of your screen, if you could just give me any type of reaction, a thumbs up, a heart, whatever that you can hear me, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, looks like my audio is working. I am going to turn off my camera so it saves me a little bit of bandwidth and so I don't lose you in the process, but you'll still hear me. All right, let us begin. So this next section of the regional training will cover the CSAC program overview. So these are our session topics for this particular session. We are going to cover Cal Grant programs, general eligibility requirements, Cal Grant cycles and types, renewal students, non-traditional terms and clock hours, and then finally school responsibilities. All right, so let us begin with the Cal Grant programs. So in California, we have two financial aid applications. So we have the California Dream Act application or the CADA and the FAFSA that we all already mentioned for federal student aid. Students should submit only one of these applications to be considered for financial aid. And again, students should only be completing one application, either the CADA or the FAFSA, not both. We also have two deadlines when it comes to Cal Grant awarding. So the first deadline is the Cal Grant priority filing deadline, which is back to March 2nd for the 2025-26 application. However, because March 2nd, 2025 lands on a Sunday, this deadline will be extended to March 3rd, which is the following Monday. So this priority deadline ensures that all students, high school, college, and returning adult college students can be processed for all award types and award cycles. Both applications, the FAFSA and the CADA, will not open until December. So there is still a chance that the priority deadline can get extended even more. But as of now, we do not have any dates yet. So make sure that you are signed up for the CSAC listservs for any special that are attending a California community college. Unlike the March deadline, the commission only processes for the competitive Cal Grant awards. There is an exception for students that have been identified as foster youth. These students can be considered for the entitlement awards during the September 2nd deadline. Moving forward, so in case you have students that missed the priority deadline of March 2nd, you should still be encouraging them to apply even after they've passed that March 2nd deadline. So we've got three examples and reasons here for you to show you why they should still apply after that priority deadline. So the first example here is because FAFSA and CADA applicants attending a California community college can still qualify for a Cal Grant through the Community College Entitlement Award during the September 2nd deadline, as I showed you in the previous slide. So they still need to complete their FAFSA and or their CADA and submit that by March 2nd. Our second reason here is our FAFSA filers can still qualify for federal aid, such as the Pell Grant and work study, other types of campus aid, as well as some scholarships. Again, the March 2nd deadline is only for the Cal Grant deadline, so that is not a deadline for any other types of aid. So again, make sure your students are still completing their financial aid application even after that March 2nd deadline. And then finally, a third reason is our California Dream Act filers, our CADA filers, can still qualify for campus aid, such as the California Promise Grant and certain scholarships. So based on the deadlines that were extended last year, the 2024-2025 application year, the deadline for that was May 2nd. So that was from last year. And again, moving forward for the 2025-2026, the priority deadline is now again March 3rd. All right, so we just want to show you the following award cycles and GPAs, as well as the deadline that we are going to be using for the following award cycles. So the commission uses GPAs from both high schools and colleges to determine Cal Grant eligibility for the various award cycles. So we have the high school entitlement E1, transfer entitlement E2, community college entitlement E3, and then the competitive C1 awards. Well, March 3rd is a priority deadline for the 25-26 applications only. We also want to just remind you that March 2nd is the deadline for the GPA submission for the 25-26 year. So again, I just want to repeat that. March 3rd is a priority deadline for the 25-26 FAFSA CADA only to be considered for a Cal Grant, but for the GPA submission deadline, that is still March 2nd. And that is on the screen here for you, bolded in red. So to go through a few of the award cycles, I'm going to start with the high school entitlement or the E1 cycle. So students in this cohort have 2 years to qualify for the high school entitlement Cal Grant, both as current high school seniors and prior year graduates. The acceptable GPAs for this entitlement cycle is from their high school GPA. For a Cal Grant, they need a minimum of 3.0, and then for a Cal Grant B, they need a minimum of a 2.0. For our transfer entitlement E2 cycles, E2 students are those who were not previously awarded a Cal Grant but became eligible under the E2 award cycle when they transferred directly from a California community college to a 4-year university. And the acceptable GPAs there are from their community college, 2.4 a minimum GPA for Cal Grant A, and a 2.0 minimum for a Cal Grant B. The community college entitlement E3 cycle are for students who did not initially receive an E1 or an E2 award. Now, students who would have previously been considered a competitive applicant have this special opportunity. So this is a new entitlement award that has been in place for a couple years now. Before, students who did not qualify for the high school or transfer entitlement would just go straight into a competitive award. But now our community college students can receive Cal Grant Award based on this community college entitlement or E3 award cycle. And the acceptable GPAs are on the screen for you. And then finally, our C1 cycle, the competitive cycle. Who are these people? This is anyone who did not receive an E1, an E2, or an E3 award. Just like I mentioned earlier, prior to the AB 132 and the E3 cycle, many students who would not have been eligible for a Cal Grant because they would have been competitive applicants. As the word implies, competitive awards are competitive and are extremely difficult to qualify for because these awards are limited in number, whereas entitlement awards are unlimited. So in other words, CSAC can award as many entitlement awards as there are eligible applicants. And the acceptable GPAs are on the screen for you again. Um, just a note here, you see high school and community college GPAs. I want to address this community college reestablished GPAs. So reestablished GPAs can only be submitted by community colleges and are based on a 16 to 23 semester units, while a regular community college is based on at least 24 semester units. All right, moving on to general eligibility requirements. So in order for a student to establish community California residency, they must have been continuously present in California for 1 year and 1 day, and they must intend on making California their permanent residency by making legal ties to California. So the commission makes the initial determination based on what the student lists on their financial aid application, but it is up to the institutions to make the final residency determination. So as you can see on your screen here, students that are under 18 are deemed dependent, and so their California residency will be based on the residency of their parents. Students that are married or are over 18 years old are deemed independent, and their California residency will be based on their own California residency status. We also have citizenship requirements. Students must either be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, meeting these three criterias, either a U.S. permanent resident, conditional permanent resident, or a U.S. CIS arrival departure record. Students who do not meet the citizenship requirement are still eligible for a Cal Grant if they meet the non-exemption for resident tuition, which has been recently extended. So these include the following right here at the bottom of your screen. If they are a refugee, asylum granted, Cuban Haitian entrant, qualified alien, victims of human trafficking, T visa holder, U visa holder, or a parolee for at least 1 year with the intent to become U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, they can qualify for a Cal Grant. So we will discuss this section right here in more detail during the DREAMAC session um, later on today. We also have incarcerated students. So incarcerated students are not eligible for Cal Grant benefits. However, a student can apply for a Cal Grant while incarcerated and can accept or receive the award if they are or will be released from law enforcement custody before the start of the semester being awarded. I also want to point out that students are not considered incarcerated if they are in a halfway house, if they are on home detention, sentenced to serve only weekends, or under the jurisdiction of the juvenile justice system in a juvenile facility. Part of eligibility requirements, students must also be making satisfactory academic process or called SAP. So the Commission follows federal Title IV SAP requirements, which stipulates that the institution must include these following elements. They must have a qualitative component, which is the GPA, a quantitative component, a PACE, a maximum time frame of 150% of the normal program length, incremental measurement, which is how often SAP is checked, an appeal process, and then finally procedures for reestablishing SAP eligibility. Now, schools must check the student's SAP before dispersing funds to them and making sure that they are making satisfactory academic progress. If a student has earned a bachelor degree, they are ineligible for a Cal Grant award unless they are in a teaching credential program or if they are in a mandatory fifth-year program. Students are encouraged to access the G42 fifth-year benefits application form or the G44 teaching credential program application form to see if their school is eligible for the following extensions to be qualified for a Cal Grant award. Moving on to consortium agreements. A consortium agreement is a contractual agreement between two colleges or two universities, which recognizes the student is registered at each school for financial aid purposes. A consortium agreement specifies which school will have financial aid responsibility when dispersing aid to the student. And it also allows for a student's financial aid eligibility to be based on the combined units they have across the affiliated campuses. Usually, we have consortium agreements when schools have a study abroad program or schools have many campuses around the area. And so there is a mother school that would take the financial aid responsibility in dispersing aid to the student. Moving on to distance learning. So distance learning is the education for students who may not always be at a campus's physical location. Cal Grant payments are allowed for distance learning if all of the following are true. If the campus providing the education is located in California, if the student is a California resident, and if all other Cal Grant eligibility requirements are met. So in addition to meeting income and asset requirements, students must have sufficient financial need every year to receive the Cal Grant. So with that, students also still need to complete a FAFSA or a CADA every year to make sure that they are meeting unmet need every year. So the commission offers preliminary awards based on unmet need, which is calculated using the college's cost of attendance. minus the SAI or the Student Aid Index, which is taken from the FAFSA or CADA. The minimum financial need for students awarded a Cal Grant A or a Cal Grant C must be the maximum award amount plus 1,500. For a Cal Grant B, the maximum financial need must be at least 700, and that's it. So this policy will continue for legacy students whose Cal Grant awards are renewed every year. Institutions that need to recalculate a student's unmet need should use the federal financial need methodology when calculating this figure. We also have student expense budget. So a student expense budget is adjusted annually using the California Consumer Price Indexes. It includes standardized allowances for food, housing, books, supplies, transportation, and personal or miscellaneous expenses based on a 9-month academic year. And then finally, the actual campus budget information provided by the institutions on web grants or on a college cost estimate form will be used for Cal Grant awarding. All right, and then this is the income and asset requirement chart for the 2025-26 Cal Grant year. So the California Code states that the maximum household income and asset ceilings applicable for a renewing recipient needs to be the higher of the adjusted ceilings for the year or the ceilings at the time of the renewing recipient's initial Cal Grant award. Now, this 2025-26 income and asset ceiling will be the same for new and renewal Cal Grant students. As a requirement, a student's total family income must be below the ceiling for their family size. So example here, if they are a family of 4 and are receiving Cal Grant or A or Cal Grant C, their income needs to be below $135,900. If the student is a dependent student, only their parents' income and assets are compared to the ceiling. If the student is deemed independent, then only their income and their spouse is if applicable, is compared. The ceilings are also broken down by family size and the different grant types. So you have Cal Grant A, B, and C. Moving on to federal summer crossovers. So while Cal Grant disbursement guidelines typically follow federal student aid policies, there are a few exceptions. For Cal Grant purposes, summer is always a trailer, and therefore Cal Grant term payments made in the award year must correspond to the FAFSA or ICER for the same award year. So for example, summer 2025 is based on the 2024-2025 ICER. Summer 2026 is based on the 25-26 ICER. If your summer term starts before July 1st, you will pull from the previous year applications, just like this example. All right, moving on, let's look at some Cal Grant cycles and types. So this is just a quick slide on Cal Grant award cycles. So there are 2 types of Cal Grant award cycles. We have the entitlement and competitive cycles. Well, the actual Cal Grant itself is the same, such as the entitlement Cal Grant B pays the same as a competitive Cal Grant B. The student cohort being considered for the award is different. There's a lot of information here, but the only thing that you need to remember is that entitlement Cal Grants are guaranteed for students who meet eligibility requirements. Competitive Cal Grants are also great, but much, much more difficult to get. So why are entitlement Cal Grants easier to get? Basically, if a student meets the eligibility requirements, they are entitled to receive a Cal Grant. The state does not put a limit on the number of entitlement Cal Grants which can be awarded, nor the total dollar amount that can be dispersed to students meeting the basic eligibility requirements. Previously, if high school seniors and prior graduates as well as transfer students meet the requirements, they are entitled to a Cal Grant. But like I mentioned earlier, back in the 2021-2022 academic year, the Community College Entitlement Cal Grant took effect. So that basically allows community college students who apply by September 2nd to be processed for an entitlement Cal Grant. Before the community college entitlement Cal Grant was enacted, those students would move directly into the competitive cycle, which would have made it a lot harder for them to receive a Cal Grant award. So I will go over more about the Community College Entitlement Cal Grant in a few slides. So as a result of this new entitlement award, it is now greatly reducing the number of competitive awards because that was basically the biggest pool of students that were given the competitive Cal Grant. So just to give you a quick definition of what a competitive award is, a competitive award is a Cal Grant that is awarded based on a scoring matrix. Unlike entitlement awards, competitive awards are limited. Generally speaking, any student who is not awarded a Cal Grant entitlement award will be considered for a Cal Grant competitive award. Whereas both a competitive cycle used to be processed for both the March 2nd and September 2nd deadlines. Moving forward, competitive students will only be considered if they apply by March 2nd. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the Entitlement Cal Grant Awards. So first, we're going to talk about the high school GPA calculation. A high school or community college GPA is required for Cal Grants A and B. Cal Grant C, specific to vocational or technical certified programs, is the only Cal Grant that does not require a GPA. But a high school GPA must be submitted to the Commission for the High School Entitlement Award, even for dually enrolled students. So if your student management system does not calculate Cal Grant GPAs for you automatically, please use the following guidelines to manually calculate GPAs. You are using unweighted 4.0 scale. You include failing grades unless they have been retaken and passed. Exclude grades from PE, ROTC, or remedial courses. Do not submit duplicate or multiple GPAs as it skews GPA reports and race to submit results. And if that happens, if you accidentally submit duplicate or multiple GPAs, you would need to contact the commission for assistance with deleting duplicate batch GPAs. Unfortunately, you can't delete them on your end. And to see the GPA calculation instructions, please follow the URL listed at the bottom of this slide. And then for any community college staff who might be in this webinar, the community college GPA are submitted by community colleges before the March 2nd and before the September 2nd deadlines. And they are used for the community college entitlement E3 award and the transfer entitlement E2 award consideration. So when calculating the community college GPA, you follow these following guidelines. For a regular GPA, this is based on a 24 semester unit. For any reestablished GPA submitted, this is going to be based on 16 to 23 semester units. You include all completed college work except for non-transferable and non-credit earning courses. And finally, failing grades must be included. Now, we also have a foster youth verification on web grants, and this screen only confirms the foster youth status for Cal Grant B awardees. This foster youth verification under Cal Grant. This does not confirm Chafee applicants and is only a view screen. So students who are eligible for the Cal Grant B for foster youth application don't need to meet the March 2nd deadline, but they do need to have their high school GPA submitted for consideration. Their application deadline is September 2nd for our foster youth students. All right, so another option to view foster youth students is to customize a roster to capture this population of students at a specific institution. So this first example, as you can see, the same BFY designation assigned under program code column will appear on the online display roster. So this is a Cal Grant B for foster youth student awardee. A second example is you can use the student history screen. You will see the eligibility may show above the normal 400% that we see traditionally with our other Cal Grant awardees. And that is because our foster youth students are given up to 800% maximum Cal Grant eligibility, which is really great. And then finally, the foster youth indicator can also be seen under the program name on the award summary screen. A quick note is that not all foster youth students will have both a Foster Youth Access Award and a lifetime eligibility extension to 800% like you see here. Students may only receive the Foster Youth Access Award through the age 26. And if they are over the age 26, they will not be eligible for the Foster Youth Access Award. We also have a few slides dedicated to transfer entitlement requirements or the E2 cycle. So the Transfer Entitlement Award is for students transferring from a California community college to a bachelor degree granting institution who meet these additional requirements. So under option A, the transfer requirements need to be, they must be a high school graduate or equivalent and must be a California resident at the time of high school graduation. Under option B, these students did not graduate from high school, but they also still need to be a California resident on their 18th birthday. In addition to either option A or option B, they need to complete these following requirements. Complete a FAFSA or CADA by the March 2nd deadline. Must be the age of must be under the age 28 on December 31st of the awarding year. They must transfer from a California community college to a bachelor degree granting institution or a BDGI in the year they are awarded. Their income and assets should be within the ceilings and must show sufficient financial need, and they must have a California community college GPA of at least 2.4. Moving forward on how to identify E2 students. Data from both the community college and from the student's FAFSA or CADA is used to identify potential E2 students. So we look at the 2.4 California College cumulative GPA. Sorry, that was a lot of words. The student is listed on a California Community College enrollment file. The student has at least one bachelor degree granting institution listed on their financial application. The student age will be under age 28 on December 31st of the award year. And then finally, the student meets financial requirements. Their income and assets are under the ceiling and they must show sufficient unmet need, many of which I already listed earlier. And this is what it looks like for web grants when we are awarding our transfer entitlement students. So it might help to see what happens during the awarding process behind the scenes. Web grants uses the data submitted by colleges from the students' FAFSA or CADA to help filter results and determine eligibility. This might also help you understand the errors that students make on their FAFSA or CADA that might cause them to be bypassed for E2 consideration. So step one, we identify if the student is a transfer student. And we look at the following criteria for this. Do they have an enrollment file from the community college? Do they have a community college GPA? Do they have a BDGI listed on their FAFSA or CADA? And are they 28 years before December 31st of the awarding year? Once we have validated that the student is a transfer entitlement student based on these criteria, their FAFSA or CADA is extracted into web grants and then they are matched to a community college GPA. Next, we look at non-financial edits. So some common edits for all applicants, we look at their California residency at the time of high school graduation. We see if they have an eligible California school listed. We make sure that they do not have a bachelor's degree received yet. Their education level is less than 5. We make sure that they have remaining Cal Grant eligibility. We see if they have any program edits, if they are in an eligible school for a specific program. We look at their GPA. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we see their remaining eligibility by the program that they are enrolled in. Step 4, we look at some financial edits. So first thing here is we see if the student is within the income and assets ceiling and if the student has sufficient financial need to qualify. And then finally, step 5, after they've passed all the edits, E2 students are placed on hold until they complete the necessary certification form. So they need to complete the G6 form, the student does. Now that we know how students are identified and offered preliminary E2 awards, we're going to check out some transfer scenarios in the next slide. But before we move on to that, I want to show you how to identify new transfers versus continuing students and what that basically entails when they are receiving their transfer entitlement award. So schools indicate whether an E2 awardee is a new transfer, which they are eligible for the transfer award, or if they are a continuing student, which makes them ineligible for the transfer award. Again, like I mentioned earlier, students must transfer in the academic year following enrollment at a community college. There is a payment requirement. New E2 students must receive at least one payment by year end. This at least one payment rule does not apply to renewal E2 students. And then posting leave of absence for all terms will result in year-end withdrawal. Spring and summer transfers are eligible as early admits provided that the school records reflect special or early admit on their statuses. Although students may only be paid as an E2 in the academic year awarded the transfer entitlement grant. So even if they are marked as an early admit, they cannot get the transfer entitlement grant until they are in the academic year that they should be awarded. All right, so like I briefly touched upon earlier, we have early special admit students. So this is a special scenario specific to early admit students offered by the college. For audit purposes, the school must indicate on school records that the student is an early admit, and the student could not receive a payment in the academic year of 2023-2024 when they are flagged as an early admit student. They can only be awarded in the 24-25 academic year. All right, so here are a few transfer scenarios. For the following questions that I will ask, you can put in the chat your answers to those questions, yes, no, or maybe. So for this, there are many unique scenarios to consider for students, and so this is going to help you in identifying if the student is eligible. So let's see if Wendy is eligible for a transfer entitlement Cal Grant for each of these following scenarios. So under scenario A, Wendy attended UC Davis in the 2023-2024 school year, but changed her mind and decided to attend a nearby community college for the 24-25 year. In 25-26, she plans on transferring to a CSU. In this case, is Wendy eligible for a transfer entitlement Cal Grant, an E2 award? Yes or no? Could you put that in the chat? And then we'll debate. All right, I have a few answers in the chat. We have one maybe and one yes. The answer here is yes. Yes, she does. Um, she is qualified for a transfer entitlement Cal Grant because she is a new student all throughout here. She comes from UC, goes to a community college, and now goes to a CSU. She is transferring into three different segments, basically. She is definitely eligible for a transfer entitlement. So let's look at scenario B, this next column or this next row. So Wendy attended UC Davis in 23-24, changed her mind and attended a community college for the 24-25 year. In 25-26, she plans on transferring to a UC. Any UC. Is Wendy eligible for a transfer entitlement Cal Grant? Yes, no, maybe so. Ooh, okay. So I've seen three different answers, maybe yes and a no. So in this example, it depends. So the maybes or maybe the yes and the no's. So it really depends on the UC. If she transfers back to UC Davis, she is considered a returning student and is not eligible for an E2 award. If she transfers to a new UC and that school deems her as a new transfer, she can then receive an E2 award. However, with the new E3 Community College Entitlement Cal Grant, Wendy can take her Cal Grant with her if she is transferring to a public school. If she is transferring to a private school, she will need to qualify as an E2 student. All right, moving on to scenario C, this column right here at the bottom. Wendy attended a community college for both fall and spring 2023-2024 and plans on transferring in the fall of 24-25 year. Is Wendy eligible for a transfer Cal Grant, transfer entitlement Cal Grant? So here we're looking at payments, or we're looking at enrollments. All right, I see a couple yeses in the chat. That is correct. Yes. Wendy is eligible for a new E2 award because she was still enrolled at a community college the previous year, and so she still has that enrollment file. Moving on to scenario E, we've got so many scenarios in this slide, or scenario D rather, A, B, C, D. D. So 23-24, she attended a community college for the fall and plans on transferring in the spring of 24-25. So in the spring of 24, she is not enrolled. Is Wendy eligible for a transfer for the transfer entitlement Cal Grant? For this second row right here. All right, we see split answers in the chat. So the answer here is yes, as long as the BDGI reports a leave of absence for the fall term, so Wendy can still be eligible for a spring payment. But if they did not put a leave of absence there, that Wendy will not be eligible. So that's really crucial if the student is not if the student is in a leave of absence status, schools should be reporting that. All right, finally, last scenario, scenario E, Wendy attended a community college in the fall of 23 and immediately transferred in spring of 24 to a BDGI. She was not considered for a new E2 Cal Grant until 24-25. Is Wendy eligible for a transfer entitlement Cal Grant? All right, I see a few split comments again, but the comment from Heidi says, no, they aren't transferring. You are correct. So in this scenario, Wendy is not eligible because she transferred early. So even if she was going to receive the E2 award in 24-25, because she transferred early, she is no longer a new transfer in that awarding year and therefore would not be eligible for the transfer entitlement award. Thank you everybody for participating in this quick scenario screen. All right, moving on. So each year, about 10% of new and renewal Cal Grant awardees are randomly flagged for the AB 840 verification of transfer entitlement eligibility. There must be complete verification of the students' eligibility before schools can disperse payment to them. So schools must verify that the students were two things, direct transfer from a community college to a bachelor's degree granting institution, and that the student must be a California resident at the time of high school graduation or on their 18th birthday. Best practice in regards to collecting verification, you should be collecting verification documentation during the initial award year in the event the student is flagged in the future for AB 840 eligibility. And you can see these flags on your display roster report or the E2 verification report in Web Grants. All right, so moving on to a couple more eligibility documentation. So there are some examples of eligibility documentation that can be requested from students in order to verify their transfer eligibility. So you can get their community college transcripts, any bachelor degree granting institution transcripts, and any enrollment agreements. For California residents at time of high school graduation or on their 18th birthday, you can request a high school transcript, a tax form. If using a tax form to verify California residency, it must be from the year that the student graduated high school or if not a high school graduate, the year that they were 18 years old. You can also pull from their California driver's license or their California identification card or any utility bills or mortgage payments. A quick reminder, the G6 transfer entitlement form is required by the student. However, this does not satisfy verification requirements. So in addition to the G6 transfer entitlement form, you also need to be collecting any eligible documentation to verify your student is a transfer student. All right, so moving on to bachelor programs. So CCBA students are eligible for the E2 Transfer Entitlement Award, as well as the Middle Class Scholarship Award. Schools must notify CSAC of all CCBA students who meet E2 or Middle Class Scholarship criteria for manual award processing. And then finally, it is really important that schools who administer the CCBA program pay their students on their O1 roster. Schools that do not utilize the O1 rosters are shorting their students who should be receiving tuition and fees. And a quick note that units should be $84 at the CCBA programs. And so you can see that from your online roster, and that's how you use your O1 roster to make sure that you are paying your students their award. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your questions. I see that the Q&A chat was blowing up for a bit. Please continue to use the Q&A feature versus the chat. It really does help our staff members to keep our questions and answers organized in the Q&A versus if you answer it in the chat. So please continue using the Q&A. And again, still did not receive the PDF to today's presentation, email training@csac.ca.gov for that, and we will get you that as soon as we can. Okay, so that is the end of my section. We are going to take a quick 5-minute break and resume the second half of this section. So it is currently at 10:38 on my clock. We are going to resume the second part of this presentation at 10:43. Come back at 10:43 and we will begin the next section. Thank you, everybody.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you for staying with us and for returning from break. My name is Yvonne Hollingsworth, and I'm going to finish out this second half of this module. We do have one more module remaining after we finish this section. It will be on the DREAM Act application and AB 540 requirements, which will be presented by Victoria. So I just wanted to introduce myself again. I'm Yvonne Hollingsworth, and I'm going to take you through the second half of this section. All right, I'm going to turn off my video. Thank you for being with us. Alrighty, so Thorisha took us through our entitlement Cal Grant programs, right? We have the high school entitlement or E1, transfer entitlement or E2, and then the community college entitlement at E3 award. So Thorisha took us through all of that. Thank you, Thorisha. Let's go ahead and look at how our competitive Cal Grants work. So basically, anybody who is not awarded an entitlement applicant would be processed as a competitive applicant. Oops, I think I missed a slide. No, that's the first one. Okay, so you can see here that we score our competitive applicants because all Cal Grants are need-based, right? So we are trying to determine the neediest students to receive these 13,000 annual awards. So you can see not very many awards. As Thorisha pointed out, our entitlement awards are unlimited. If students meet the criteria, they get the award. Competitive awards are very hard to get because there are so few of them and there are so many thousands of students that apply for a limited number of awards. So these are the GPA requirements to receive a Cal Grant A or B. Cal Grant C, of course, is the only one that does not require a GPA to be considered for a Cal Grant C, but that's also our award that is for vocational technical programs, not for bachelor or associate degrees. So when we receive that student's FAFSA or DREAM Act application, and they are not going to be processed as an entitlement applicant, that's when we take this into account, these scoring matrix. So depending on how a student responds to those questions on the financial aid application, they would receive X number of points for their response. And again, these are what we call disadvantage factors. So the lower or the higher the student scores in the disadvantaged categories, meaning they have a greater disadvantage, those students could receive potentially a maximum of these awards, or excuse me, points for these various categories. So you can also have access to see these competitive scores. I believe it's on the award detail screen in web grants. So yeah, you can absolutely see if a student didn't get a competitive award, why not? It's usually because they didn't score high enough as compared to the pool, right? The pool of other applicants might get closer to these max points than your student, but you can always confirm that through the award detail screen. Now, every year CSAC will withdraw and then re-award any competitive awards that are not being used. In other words, we're going to go through all of our student records and determine of the competitive awardees at all of our schools who has been paid and who has not. If we see a significant number of unpaid awards, we will send an announcement through our listserv saying, hey, schools, CSAC is preparing to recycle and withdraw and recycle these competitive awards. So be sure that you've paid everybody on your roster who's eligible for payment. So if by the time we go to actually process the recycles, your students have not been paid, they would be captured in that mass withdrawal. And this is by design, right? We're not trying to hurt your students, but rather we want to ensure that we hit 100% paid utilization. We want to ensure that every student with a competitive Cal Grant is using that award, that they're benefiting from it. And if not, that somebody else, another student, will. So that's the purpose of the competitive recycle. We want to maximize utilization and increase the paid rate. This is also important for determining future funding, right? If we have a bunch of competitive awards that are unutilized, legislation might say, well, you don't need all that money because these students aren't using it. So it's really, really important to timely pay these students and pay attention to those listservs so that you do have that last chance to double check your rosters before CSAC goes through and withdraws those students. And then what we do after the withdrawal is we re-award them to the students who are next in line based on those disadvantage points that we looked at here, right? So if your student didn't score high enough and then we do this mass withdrawal, we would then take the next, however many awards we end up with after withdrawing them, we would then recycle those awards to any other students that are next in line on that scoring matrix. And this screen is here only because this is the community college grant offerings. They have two at our community colleges, right? The Student Success Completion Grant and the California College Promise Grant. And we just stuck this in here because this first award works in tandem with the Cal Grant, which we're about to look at in just a moment. So you can see that any student who is more than full-time enrolled and already has a Cal Grant could receive an additional up to $8,000 per year from their community colleges. The purpose of this is to crank these students through the community college system on time. So if those students are super accelerated in taking an abundance of units, full-time or greater than full-time, they can get paid extra money for that incentive. So that's a really good incentive for those students who want to just, yeah, they're super accelerated and they are trying to get through their associate degree so that they can likely transfer to a university. And then the California College Promise Grant does not have to go to students who already have a Cal Grant, but basically the college, the community college, is going to look at those students' financial aid applications the same way CSAC does, and they will determine if that student is eligible for the California College Promise Grant, which does waive those enrollment fees of $46 per unit. So it basically gives that student mostly free education at the community college level. So really great opportunities for our students to potentially stack both a community college grant on top of a Cal Grant and on top of a Pell Grant, or at least that's our hope, right? Our hope is that students can stack various types of financial aid so that they get closer to paying their cost of attendance. Now, you probably already know that we have three Cal Grant types, Cal Grants A, B, and C, for different purposes. And the good thing is that students don't need to do anything special to apply for a specific grant. They simply let us know on those financial aid applications, the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, what they are pursuing, which colleges they'll be attending, if they're pursuing their first bachelor degree, that sort of thing. Those questions that are asked on both applications. With that information and with the students listing all colleges that they're considering, even colleges that they might want to just add as a backup plan, that will then give us the information we need, or rather our system, Web Grants, the database that we use, that will give the database Web Grants all of the information that it needs to make a determination as to which Cal Grant that student will receive. A student can only receive one Cal Grant, either an A, a B, or a C. So the Cal Grant A's are typically for students pursuing a bachelor degree. It could also capture some two-year associate degree students. And then the Cal Grant B is also typically going to be for our two-year associate degree students. And then Cal Grant C is specific to our vocational technical programs. And once again, is the only Cal Grant that does not require a GPA. You can see here, this is a pretty busy chart, but I'll try to break this down. Basically, Cal Grants pay the same exact dollar amount to every student with the same Cal Grant type attending the same college segment. So as you can see, as an example, Cal Grant A students at a CSU are all going to receive $6,084 out of their Cal Grant. And that's because Cal Grant pays the quote, statewide tuition and fees, unquote. This is not the cost of attendance, right? This is a portion of the cost of attendance, and that's the portion that Cal Grant pays. Similarly, at a UC, all Cal Grant awardees with a Cal Grant A, or we'll use a different example, Cal Grant B at a CSU, or excuse me, UC, will receive this amount, $12,570, depending on the cohort. And that's what these asterisks refer to, which we don't have a little legend to explain what the asterisks mean, but the UC systems have cohorts depending on what year that student entered the UC system. So for the 24-25 UC cohort, that pays $12,570 with a Cal Grant B plus $1,648, which is called the Access Award. For those of you who are already in the industry, that is the Access Award. And so you'll see that that is the same amount across all the segments. And that is really intended for books and supplies. And so that usually goes directly to the student. And then lastly, our Cal Grant C, offered at community colleges, right, our VOTEC programs, as well as proprietary and trade schools. So these are the dollar amounts that all students will receive for the given segments. One thing I did want to also point out is that you'll notice for Cal Grant A at community college, it'll say $0 to $6,000. What is that about? So $0 is the amount that most students will receive out of their Cal Grant A at a community college. And that is because Cal Grant A has never paid out at a community college because it is specific to our universities. So the Cal Grant A only pays at the university level. Um, and so every student at a community college with a Cal Grant A is typically going to receive $0. The up to 6,000 refers to a couple of very special Cal Grant add-ons. You may have heard of the Students with Dependents Award, right? So that is where a Cal Grant A student at a community college could then get this access award of up to $6,000 if they're full-time enrolled, because they have a qualifying child under 18 years of age for whom they are providing more than 50% support. So that is what goes to our Students with Dependents Award. And similarly, our Foster Youth Access Award. So if a student indicates on that financial aid application that they were a part of the foster care system at any point since age 13, again, our Web Grants database will pull that information and will vet that information against our records with the California Department of Social Services. So we then know and can confirm that that student was part of the foster care system. And once that is confirmed, that former foster youth or current foster youth then would receive up to $6,000. Same thing as our Students with Dependents awardees at a community college if they are enrolled full time. If that student is enrolled half time, they would get half of that amount. So those are some special awards, but typically Cal Grant A does not pay out at the community college, and instead it will automatically be placed on community college reserve for 2 years. And if a student spends an extra year at the community college, which is pretty common, they can actually log into their Web Grants for Students portal, and on that portal can request to place another community college reserve for a 3rd year. So know that that is an option. Now, when students are preliminarily awarded a Cal Grant, we email them the California Aid Report. We're saying, student, you have gotten a Cal Grant from the Student Aid Commission. And the colleges could always change that information, right? If the colleges get documentation that changes the award outcome, then they would report that to us. But typically, when a student is preliminarily awarded, we're going to send them this California Aid Report called a CAR. And so you can see the different times that those students would receive it. Depending on the cohort that is being awarded, a high school entitlement applicant would get that CAR, or that CAR is generated after the student confirms their college of attendance. And for those transfer entitlement or E2 students, it's triggered by the student submitting their transfer entitlement certification form to confirm that yes, indeed, they met the criteria under the transfer entitlement program. Competitive awards as they're processed, and then that Cal Grant C, right? What solidifies that award is the student responding through their Web Grants for Students portal and submitting that Cal Grant C supplement form. And this is what the CAR looks like for our DREAM Act applicants. So the California Aid Report is sent to all students, and this is just an example of a student who's gotten this as an E3 awardee, and that would happen after the college verifies that that student is actually enrolled. So for the community colleges on the line with us, I know we have both community colleges and universities and private schools. But the community colleges are the ones that are actually verifying that a student is actually enrolled, and they do that by uploading an enrollment file or reporting that on the roster. And so once that is done is when that student gets that award notification that yes, they actually have an award, and that enables the school to then disperse on that E3 award. Now, it's possible that a student could be dually eligible for a Cal Grant A and a Cal Grant B, but they're not going to receive both. They would receive one or the other. And the one that they receive is determined by the College of Attendance. So in a nutshell, Cal Grant A, students attending a UC system, a University of California school, or a private school, typically those schools have told the commission that they want those awards to default to the Cal Grant A because that's going to be most beneficial to the student at those college segments. The Cal Grant B, it's our CSUs that will request that the student who is dually eligible default to the Cal Grant B. The Cal Grant B actually pays more over the course of the 4 years because remember it has that additional books and supplies money of $1,648. So over the course of the 4 years, generally speaking, the Cal Grant B will be more beneficial to the student at a CSU, but the Cal Grant B also works a little bit differently. In year one, it does not pay the tuition and fees award. It only pays the $1,648 in access money. And that's why a student at, say, a UC or a private is going to default to the Cal Grant A because in year one, Cal Grant A will pay that tuition and fees. And we saw that at a UC for the 24-25 years cohort, that's $12,570. That's a lump of money, right? And so, yeah, that's how this works in our system. Those schools have requested that the students who are dually eligible would default to a Cal Grant A at private schools and UCs, and a CSU would default to a Cal Grant B. By the way, also CSUs will typically cover the student's first year of tuition and fees award, that portion of the award that they don't normally get. The university will usually cover that at the CSU with a university grant. So if that's not possible, though, you might see students that request to have their award flipped. And that's what this slide is all about. A student who may have been pointed to receive a Cal Grant B, but does not have the tuition and fees portion to come up with in year one. And if the school is not offering that student that state university grant, then that student might say, well, hey, I'm going to flip this to the Cal Grant A because that one will pay the tuition and fees portion of that award in year one. But when a student does that, they are then forever locked into a Cal Grant A going forward. And that also means that they will not receive that additional access money of $1,648. And so if this is something that your students are interested in doing, that you want to help them with, by all means, but you want to let us know that we're going to flip that award by completing the G10 award. That's I think it's called the Student Grant Record Change, or sorry, that's not the name of the award. It's a G10, but you can find that on our CSAC website. And yeah, that's how you're going to let us know that this student is going to flip their award from B to A. And once again, once that student changes that program type from going forward from that point forward or going forward, then that student will be locked into a Cal Grant A. And so every year at renewal, they're going to be renewing as a Cal Grant A applicant. Now, the things that tell our system the difference between a Cal Grant B awardee or a Cal Grant C awardee is, again, what the student has provided on that financial aid application. They're going to let us know that they're pursuing whichever type of award that they indicate. But the best way to ensure that they receive consideration for all types of grants is to include a college from all college segments. That means that we're suggesting and recommending that students at a community college, a CSU, a UC, and a private or trade school. That way, if our system goes and tries to process something, say for Cal Grant A, but they don't meet the criteria, we will move on and try to get them a Cal Grant B. And then if they don't meet that criteria, we will then try to get them a Cal Grant C. But if the student doesn't list a college segment that offers all of those award types, they're going to be bypassed for that specific award type. So, for example, a student might really be pining to get their associate degree, but for whatever reason, it doesn't happen, but that student has a backup plan to start a certificate program in their vocational, technical, or career training education programs. And so that is possible. So students need to let us know as much information as possible on those financial aid applications so that we can then make those determinations and point the student to the award that is most beneficial to them based on that information they provided on their financial aid applications. Now, Cal Grants typically will only last for 4 years, meaning a student who's awarded as a freshman in college would normally get that Cal Grant and can renew it for a total of 4 years, right? So that the goal is to get their bachelor degree. There are a few exceptions. A couple of those exceptions are what you see on the board here, right? So there are some mandatory fifth-year programs often centered around the more tech-heavy programs like architecture and engineering. And the campuses that are offering those programs require that students are enrolled for 5 years. And so it's specific programs offered at specific campuses. So this G44 form lists all of the campuses and the specific programs that a student could be eligible for fifth-year programs. And so when a student is approaching the end of their 4th year of Cal Grant, they would then send us this G44 form so that we can extend their benefits for an additional year. Similarly, teaching credential students can also get this for a 5th year because those programs are longer in term, and they would submit the G42 for the teacher credentialing form. Now let's look at renewal students. So we've now gone through the entitlement students, we've gone through our competitive applicants, and now every year thereafter, we hope that a student will renew their award up until they get that bachelor degree, right? A Cal Grant will pay up to the bachelor degree, except for the instance that we just looked at in our teacher credentialing programs. So in order for our system to pick up and renew a student every year for the following year, our system will scan the award and make sure that they have at least 10% remaining eligibility, right? When a student goes into the program as a freshman, they might start out with 400% or 4 years of eligibility, but every term and every quarter, every year that they use that up, they're exhausting their eligibility. So in order for us to renew that year after year, they have to have at least 10% remaining eligibility, and every term has to be satisfied with a renewable transaction. So either a payment code, maybe the O codes, which indicate that a student had other payments from a different financial aid source, or a leave of absence. So it has to have a placeholder as a renewable transaction in order for a system to be able to, renew that every year. Obviously, they have to have a financial aid application on file before the end of the year. Why? At the end of the year officially is June 30th of every year. So if that student wants to renew their award for the upcoming school year, they want to have submitted their new financial aid application before the end of the year. Otherwise, they're not going to be picked up as an active applicant. This can be fixed if your student applies late and they should have been renewed. This can be fixed, but it requires rework. So we want to encourage our students to apply on time. And on time is really March 2nd, even though these are renewal students, so they do not have to meet the March 2nd deadline. That's just a good thing to let the student know so that they don't lose sight of it and apply late. And of course, year after year, students do have to meet the income and asset requirements as well as unmet need requirements. So here are some funny things, not funny, but a little unusual things that can happen with the Cal Grants. Again, we try to always ensure that we are doing following best practices so that the student can maximize their Cal Grant award. So this is one of the unusual things that you may have seen if you've been in the industry for some time. It doesn't happen too often, but it can happen. So if a student is both eligible for the A and B award in that first year, remember we talked about dually eligible students and how our system determines which Cal Grant that student would get based on the college segment, right? But if that student would have been dually eligible, except they exceeded the income and asset requirements, the lower of the income asset ceilings in the Cal Grant B of the Cal Grant B in the renewal year, we, CSAC, will automatically switch them to a Cal Grant A if they are within the Cal Grant A income and asset thresholds. Remember, Cal Grant A has higher income and asset thresholds than a Cal Grant B, which is for lower income families. So if a student does not meet the Cal Grant B income and asset requirements in that renewal year, but they do meet the income and asset requirements for Cal Grant A, we will automatically switch them to the Cal Grant A so that they can still get an award. They're not going to get that access money, which is the extra books and supplies money that a Cal Grant B comes with, but at least it will give that student the Cal Grant money, whereas otherwise it would just simply be ineligible. Note also that that student has to have had a Cal Grant A eligible GPA in year one, which would have been a 3.0 coming out of high school or a 2.4 college GPA. Now, there are what were also called the renewal exceptions, and this also gets a little bit hairy. So if a student was ineligible for the renewal in that first year because of these things that we just described, they've exceeded the income or asset ceilings, they don't have enough financial need, they would still be eligible to renew that award if, again, they meet all the eligibility requirements, financial and other eligibility, and still have remaining eligibility in that Cal Grant program, meaning they haven't exhausted all and used up all of their Cal Grant. But when this happens, we are then going to allow that student to get an award in the renewal year, or you'll see on the next example. It would end up being a year 3 award for this example that we'll show you. And then that's going to result in the student losing 1 year of eligibility. And let's see what this looks like. But this is still a better option than not getting a Cal Grant at all. So let's see. So this is what this would look like. Student one, in year 1, they got a Cal Grant A and were awarded with 4 years of 400% eligibility. The student got paid at full-time status. So they used 100% or 1 year of their eligibility in that year 1, which is the normal pattern that typically students use. So at the end of that first year, they would go into their renewal year, year 2, typically with 300% or 3 years of eligibility. But in year 2, that student's not eligible for renewal. Their income is over the ceiling for Cal Grant A, remember, and B, or sorry, not B. Their Cal Grant is over their income and assets are over the ceilings for the Cal Grant A. So they're not going to get this award in year 2, but we're also not going to completely withdraw it. It's going to be sort of in the background in this renewal year. They're not going to get paid, but it's not going to be withdrawn. So they're going to recapture it in year 3. So the student regains financial eligibility for that Cal Grant A. And so they're going to get that award back anyway, but it's going to remove this 100% of eligibility that they didn't get it in year 2, but we held it. We preserved the award for them. So we deduct that year that we held it for them. Now that student will be renewed in year 3, but with 200% or 2 years of eligibility. So I hope that makes sense. It's not a very common scenario, but it does happen. And here's what this looks like in our screens. I think this is the student summary screen, if you're familiar with that. So you would see is starting in year 22-23, that student was auto accepted for Cal Grant A, program type Cal Grant A. And we had seen on the previous slide that they used that the whole year. They used 100% eligibility, which means that in 23 and 24, they would have had 300% eligibility, except that they didn't meet the income and assets or unmet need requirements. So it's telling us they are financially ineligible in year 2. So then it's in year 3, the 24-25 school year, that student is again financially eligible, and then they again return to their original program type, Cal Grant A. Now, this particular screen does not show you the reduction in eligibility that we just talked about, but you can see the remaining eligibility after each school year in the student award detail screen. So this screenshot is from the student award summary. The student award detail screen will show you the actual eligibility year after year. Now we know that not all students who were awarded a Cal Grant are actually eligible because of additional information that the colleges get, right? Additional documentation, or having to do a verification that changes the award outcome. Or the flip, a student maybe should have been awarded based on X, Y, and Z, but that student missed that information on their financial aid application, or another scenario. So there are reasons that you're going to then let the commission know that we need to make corrections to either remove that award or reinstate, not reinstate, but to consider an award. But to do most of this, we're going to submit a G21. You're reporting changes on to the commission through the grant record change form G21 or the grant application screen MG21. There are two different screens in web grants, and different changes are reported on both screens. We'll show you a breakdown of the types of changes reported on each. But if you're looking to report one type of change on one screen and you don't find it there, it could be that it's going to be reported on the other screen. So when you are submitting those changes, be sure to report all the information to us. So for our entitlement applicants, you can appeal those or submit those G21s or MG21s basically through the end of the school year, because those students were entitled to those awards, right? And so we're going to accept those through the end of the school year, June 20th. You would let us know in the notes section of that application which ICER number to refer to, because typically a student has made a correction to their financial aid application so that we can then reprocess them to either withdraw or reconsider them for an award based on a new ICER transaction. So let us know in the notes section what that ICER number is so that we can then manually reprocess those with the corrected information. Competitive applicants really have to get their application submitted correctly the first time, because they don't have that latitude that entitlement applicants do. So if they make a mistake on their application, there's not really a whole lot we can do to help them. So really they need to make all those corrections, and schools, you can help your students in this process before they actually, before their application is processed, not before they submit it, but before we process it. And we announce when we're getting ready to process our E1 awardees. Those are the first high school entitlement applicants, are the first students to have their applications processed. And then we do E2, E3 in that order, and competitive applicants are processed a little bit later. So we announce those as we're getting ready to process them through our listserv. So you would know, and you can help your students make sure that their applications are correct. They've listed all the colleges they're considering, that sort of thing, before they actually have those applications processed. Now, the grant record change, the first of the two screens that we're going to look at, remember we have MG21 and the G21. So this first one is the G21, and this is what we're going to use to report these changes to unmet need, program change requests. That's what we talked about earlier, the flip from a Cal Grant A to a Cal Grant B. You would put that information in the comment section. Dependency status changes. Your student doesn't meet your California residency policy requirements, even though they may have initially been chosen as a preliminary awardee based on CSAC California residency requirements, but your school's policy will trump ours. So you may end up withdrawing a student based on their not being a California resident, or that student is under 18 and unmarried. And so we're going to use the parent residency, state of residency to make that determination. Basically, all of these changes can be reported through this online form. CSAC will then process them for you, and then they would become solidified over the weekend. So all those transactions would be reconciled over the weekend and then fully processed by Monday morning. Now, any changes that are not made on the first screen we looked at, the G21, could be reported on the MG21. And so these are really like your changes in total income, the student or family's net worth, student aid index, family size. That's a big one, right? And so those are the types of changes that are reported here, the state of legal residency, that sort of thing. Not all of these fields are changeable, but many of them are. So use those forms online to let us know what types of changes you would like us to make to that student's award so that we can either withdraw it or get them reconsidered based on new information. Now, you don't want to use either of those two screens for these following changes. If you want to withdraw a student because they graduated, don't submit these forms. Instead, use the SR senior code. And that, by the way, for any community colleges listening in, I believe this code is only available to our universities because this is implying that the student has graduated from a bachelor program. So universities would use the senior code SR to let us know that that student is graduated, and then it will automatically withdraw that award. Requesting a withdrawal after you reported IG. IG means ineligible for the grant, but this does not mean financially ineligible for the grant. IG should only be reported if the student is in the wrong type of program, i.e., the student was awarded a Cal Grant C, but they are not enrolled in a vocational or technical program. That would be an appropriate use of the IG. But it is not used to report financial ineligibility. Instead, you would want to submit those forms with that corrected information so that we can then withdraw that student properly. And it's all tracked properly and recorded in web grants with the correct codes. If you reported that the student is not eligible for that transfer entitlement, there's a special payment code or an adjustment code for that. It's IT. You don't need to submit a G21. Just report IT, and that tells the web grants database that the reason for withdrawing that award is because the student's not eligible. They don't meet the transfer entitlement criteria. Verifying education level, that can be done right on the roster, directly student by student, or it can be uploaded as a batch, but again, not reported on these two screens. Making a professional judgment on a competitive awardee, right? Competitive students just don't have a whole lot of leeway. They really need to submit their application correctly, or worst case scenario, if they make a mistake, they need to correct that mistake correct that mistake before CSAC will process the C1 award cycle. And then withdrawing an ineligible student after you made a payment, you want to make sure you back out the payment first, right? We gotta pull that payment from the student if they weren't eligible, and then you can submit that G21 or MG21. Now let's go into this next section. This may not apply to a whole lot of us who are on the line. with us because most of us, I believe, have traditional semester and quarter terms, but there are some schools that operate in non-traditional terms, either non-term schools, non-standard term schools, clock hour schools. So we'll just spend a couple minutes looking at those briefly. So in a nutshell, CSAC does typically follow federal guidelines around most of these non-standard or non-traditional terms. So students also have to fulfill at least 50% of that quote payment period. And your school determines what the payment period is in order for that student to have completed that course and to be eligible for the full payment. They have to have finished at least half of their payment period. And this is specific to our non-traditional and non-standard schools. So I said earlier, you'd have to define your payment term, right? That in your school, that could be called a term, that could be called a module or a block, but you want to define that in your policy, not only so that CSAC auditors know that you're following policy, but also so that your students are aware of what they need to do to get and receive and maintain their Cal Grant awards. So in this example, this school is using modules, and they are saying that 3 modules is the equivalent to 1 term or 1 payment period. So they would define, again, just an example, but they might define full time as being 2 out of 3 of those modules that have been completed. Other schools might have this sort of a setup, right? Where they have X number of days in a specific term, and on the 50th day, or sorry, not the 50th day, at the halfway point, 50% through that term, that student is considered complete and full-time and eligible for all their disbursements. So those schools typically are going to report their payment once they meet the halfway point. So in these examples, the 46th day, the 47th day, etc. And still, yeah, there are other schools that have a rolling term or rolling start type of a calendar. And it might look like something like this. This is a pretty cool graphic. I can't take credit for this, but one of the schools that we work with actually created this. And this lets them know how those rolling starts begin and if that student is considered a fall, spring, or summer enrollee. And so you can get creative about how your policies are written, but it should be very, very clear so that students and CSAC auditors can understand how you're paying. And it makes it difficult. I have an appreciation for the schools that offer these types of non-standard terms because our CSAC rosters are built on a cookie cutter calendar based on, quarters and terms, right? So it makes it a little bit difficult for these folks in these non-traditional setups to actually report payment accurately. So having strongly written policies is your best bet. Now, for schools that have clock hours, again, we are following federal guidelines. So a semester unit would be equivalent to 30 clock hours, or a quarter would be 20 clock hours, 900 clock hours to be enrolled in a full year. So when you all are at these various clock hour programs are determining what the student's enrollment level is, this is the calculation. You would add up the total terms total hours the student is enrolled in for that term, and then divide by 30 if you're at a semester school, or divide by 20 at a quarter school. And that gives you the enrollment status. So we can see in this example, the student was enrolled in 450 clock hours. Doing the math here for the semester example, gives us 15 semester units, and that is definitely a full-time payment. So you would be able to pay the student out at full time. Similar example, but for our quarter system, same math, right? We're using 20 hours to divide that by our total clock hours that the student is enrolled for. In this example, 280 hours divided by 20 quarter units would result in 14 this should say quarter, not semesters, 14 quarter units, enabling that student to also be considered a full-time student. And then similarly, if we've got students that are three-quarter time enrolled, same math once again, but we're using that total time that the total clock hours the students enrolled in, using our math to divide, but depending on spring or semester or quarter system, in this case semester, so we're dividing by 30, we get 10 semester units, which results in a three-quarter time payment. And similarly, same example, but using 220 clock hours divided by 20 for this quarter school, and that student still is a three-quarter time student. So just some examples to help you out there. And then as we approach the end of this particular module and before we take another break, let's just look at these last couple of slides. We put this calendar together for you. Hopefully this is easy for you so that you can then pop these things onto your own calendar and not miss any deadlines. We do usually send these announcements that, hey, this upcoming deadline for the California license exam reporting is coming up, but you can also calendar these items as well. And I'm not going to go over all of these because you've got this as a PDF, so you can print this out and keep this handy as a reference. Now, we saw the monthly checklist, and so weekly, we want to be sure that we are running the accept reject report so that any transactions we reported during the week that did not process will show up on the reject report so that we can go and figure out what transpired and fix those errors, right? So we run the rosters or the transactions that you report on your roster are run over the weekend. So you'll notice if you stayed late working on a Friday night after 5 p.m., sometimes web grants will just be shut down. And that's because we're getting ready to process all those transactions that all of our campuses have reported during the week so that come Monday, you have fresh rosters with new information. There are some other tools that you may not be aware of, like this award extract report that may help you in, making these determinations and defining which of your students was awarded or not awarded. Doing your verifications, right? We have the AB 840 holds, the education level holds that are flagged. And so when you see those flags on your roster, you can either run reports to get a list of the students or just go down your actual payment roster student by student and clear those flags and verify those things that you're being asked to verify. Ongoing requirements, right? Reconciling on a weekly, monthly, or per term basis so that by the time the end of the year reconciliation rolls around, this is a very easy job. It's not a year's worth of reconciling that you're doing. You should just be at that point reconciling whatever you didn't reconcile from the previous week. Working that roster weekly, right? So again, we process new transactions over the weekend so that Monday you might have some new awardees. And so we want to go in and work those rosters regularly on an ongoing basis. This is, this information is basically repeated down below. So these are weekly requirements, ongoing requirements throughout the school year. And then that brings us to this last slide. So again, a reminder that we did send out the PDF of this webinar. If you haven't received it, check your spam and junk boxes. And if it's still not there, make sure that this email address is a trusted contact and that your agency or your organization's firewall security systems are not blocking our emails and attachments. So with that said, let us go ahead and take one more break before we introduce our final section of today, our final module, which Victoria will go over, and that's on our DREAM Act application and the AB 540 requirements. So I show us at 11:33. Let's go ahead and return at 11:38. That's in 5 minutes. 11:38, and we will resume. Thank you so much, everybody.